The John C. Calhoun statue will not go to the Charleston Museum. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I speak exclusively with the president and CEO of the Historic Charleston Foundation, Winslow Hastie, one-on-one. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Winslow Hastie, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, yes, sir. I know, obviously, you are the president and CEO of the Historic Charleston Foundation and have been for, I believe, 2 years now. So,
yeah, over 2, yes.
What's the biggest difference between 2 years ago and right now, as far as you being the president and CEO?
God, where to start? You know, I mean, the obvious part of that answer is this pandemic that we're dealing with. It's been a huge challenge for my organization, much like many other businesses, nonprofits, and governmental institutions. It's hard to even describe the impacts that it's had in terms of the way we do work, impacting our revenue and fundraising opportunities, and it's very difficult because a lot of our work involves being with people, engaging with people. We do events, and we do tours, and we do a lot of things that involve people coming together, and obviously we can't do that. So that has been a huge impact to us. So that's an obvious difference that we've been dealing with over the past few months, obviously. And then, the other very interesting layer on top of that that's happened over the last few months is, of course, all the social unrest and protesting and all that around the tragic killing of George Floyd and all the subsequent events that happened from there. So that is sort of accelerated a lot of conversations in the Charleston community and obviously nationally and beyond around the subject of race and systemic racism and all that. So that is obviously something that we take very seriously, and it's an issue that my organization's been engaged with. Maybe less on the sort of current events side of combating that issue, but it has been a very important part of our efforts as it relates to programming and education and preservation, that we engage and amplify the contributions of the African American community in Charleston and in the Low Country, both currently, but also obviously going back to the institution of slavery and all that. So that is brought very much into the spotlight those concerns that we all have in Charleston and beyond, and so that's been a huge shift. And obviously that conversation has been going on for some time. It's not a new conversation, but certainly the Emmanuel event in 2015, the tragic killing of the 9 parishioners at the Mother Emmanuel. So you sort of had 2015, and that was a sort of come to Jesus reckoning for a lot of us. And then, of course, the Charlottesville events in 2016. Here we are in 2020, and you could argue while it's these conversations are not light, it's not. Haven't seen a lot of major changes, unfortunately, to address some of these issues of income inequality and, prison reform, education, housing, you name it. It kind of weaves into every aspect of our lives. So those are 2 big things that certainly come to mind.
Yes, sir. And obviously you talk about history, you talk about slavery, you talk about obviously racial issues. Let me take you to the Charleston Museum. As you know, they're saying, hey, no, we don't want the John C. Calhoun statue at all. And as a matter of fact, they sent this statement, quote, "While we recognize that John C. Calhoun was a man of significant national historical importance, he was not a Charleston figure. And such his biographical history does not fit with the museum's general purpose and mission of interpreting the culture and natural history of Charleston and the Low Country. Moreover, the museum has not traditionally collected statuary of political figures. They're saying, hey, he's not a Charleston figure, and obviously his biographical history in their mind does not fit in with the museum's general purpose and mission. What what museum, from your historical standpoint, would fit for Calhoun as far as mission and purpose?
Wow. I don't want to get in the way of the Charleston Museum. They're a great partner of ours. We work with them on a lot of different initiatives, archaeology and other things. But I would have to counter that statement, and I understand that it's extremely controversial, but I personally believe that the Charleston Museum actually would be the right spot for that statue to be displayed and interpreted in a correct way. And the reason I say that is because, really the story of that statue is a story of Charleston. Both when the original statue was put up in the 1880s, and they have the finger of the original Calhoun monument that was taken down, that was ripped off by members of our community. And I believe, I don't know the story super well, but I'm fairly certain it was ripped off by members of the African American community who saw the original statue as a symbol of white supremacy and sort of a threatening symbol in our civic square, Marion Square. And then, of course, there was the effort in the 1890s they built a new statue and put it 115 feet in the air. And that story in and of itself is, I think, an extremely important story to talk about. And that statue affords the opportunity to talk about Reconstruction, talk about Jim Crow in Charleston, the Lost Cause movement, and to juxtapose that statue with the finger of the original statue in some really interesting way and talk about these issues. And then you can bring it all the way up to 2020 and what the city was dealing with and the protests and Black Lives Matter and all of those. I mean, it tells an extremely compelling story of the sort of trajectory of race in Charleston and the subjugation and intimidation of African Americans in our city. And I think it's that kind of unvarnished and accurate interpretation of the past that we need more of in Charleston. And so I get that they're worried that it's going to be a symbol, a divisive symbol in our community, but it already is, and I think it has the power to tell an extremely compelling and important story about the history of Charleston.
And I know people don't know this, but obviously you are having some Wi-Fi issues, so I'm going to try to get back to you at another time. But I want to ask you one last question, because it's in reference to your op-ed in the Post-Record, I believe, on June 20th. And it reads this quote, I'm taking a part of it. It says this quote, "To remove the remnants of the Calhoun Monument will be a missed opportunity to enlighten future generations about this movement in time," meaning a moment when the Black Lives Matter movement became a rallying cry for something much bigger. A moment that is, when millions responded to a call for racial and social justice for all communities who have been or felt marginalized through history. A moment when white America has to confront inherent racism and white privilege. A moment when Americans, black, white, brown, young, and old, join together as a community and effective change. Winslow, let me ask you this. How do you enlighten this current generation?
Well, again, I mean, we work and I apologize for the technical issues, Quintin. I was hoping that our Wi-Fi would be more robust up here I'm in North Carolina, but anyway, hopefully you can hear me on this. We start at Historic Charleston Foundation work with history. We do a lot of different things. We're an advocacy organization working on current issues as it relates to planning and growth and making sure Charleston grows in a responsible manner. But, we have house museums and we have other history initiatives that, again, what's super important to us is sort of and I don't want this to sound like platitudes because we really do this in our everyday work, but it's sort of making sure that we tell the full history of Charleston, and we tell it in a way that is authentic and real and inclusive. And so to me, whether it's, and what I was getting at in that op-ed was I was worried about this sort of a snowball effect as it relates to monuments. And I know it's easy for me as a white male to say this, but our feeling was yes, it was a positive maneuver to bring down that statue. It was such a divisive symbol for our city and in such an important location, raised up way up in the sky. But what we were saying is let's take some time and as a community have a conversation around what we could envision for that column that's in Marion Square that the statue was on, that there might be an opportunity. I'm not saying definitely that it should stay, but we should at least have a conversation about how we could repurpose that column, potentially putting another symbol on top that is reflective of 21st century Charleston, that wouldn't be as divisive, that would be able to tell the story of what we've been dealing with around monuments and memory and history in Charleston. But again, that is more inclusive, that is a product of community dialogue and interaction. I just think that there's a potential opportunity there. And at the end of the day, if as a community and working with city council and other institutions in Charleston, it ends up that it's too painful and too divisive, then sure, the column itself should come down. But I think it's worthy of a conversation. I mean, Charleston is well known for its history of preservation and adaptive reuse of buildings and spaces and even monuments like that. So it was sort of the gist of my op-ed, but in terms of sort of how we engage the community around a lot of these issues, I just think we need to create safe spaces for people to talk together and listen. I mean, a lot that we all know there's a lot of listening that needs to be done, particularly from the white community, listening to communities of color, and getting a better understanding what they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and how, again, we go back to what we can learn from the past. Because, again, when the past and history is presented in a accurate and more inclusive manner, then I think we have a lot to learn from that. And again, what I've told a lot of people is that Calhoun monument and its pedestal, in juxtaposition with Mother Emanuel just a half a block down the street, in juxtaposition with the International African American Museum that's being built as we speak at the foot of Calhoun Street. There's a lot of power in those symbols and those things sort of being in juxtaposition. And I just think as a community to have conversations around that, that are real and authentic, there's a lot of power in that.
Well, then, how authentic is Charleston's history now that the removal of John C. Calhoun has been taking place?
How authentic? Is
Yes.
that your question?
Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, that's an argument that a lot of folks who don't want to see these monuments touched, they say, oh, well, we can't rewrite history. History's painful and hard, and you want to better understand history so that you don't make the mistakes of the past, right? So, and I think there's some truth to that. But to me, the other flip side of that argument is, monuments don't write history. Historians and textbooks and other educators sort of really write history and teach history to students of all ages. Monuments really don't write history. So this erasing history, we need to be careful about that argument. I don't think the removal of one monument erases the contributions that John C. Calhoun made as a statesman and a politician in South Carolina in the 19th century. But if you really start peeling back the onion and understanding better the time and the place and the backers of putting up that monument, that is the story that can't be forgotten. And that is the story of Jim Crow, the story of the Lost Cause movement of the late 19th century. And it was, I mean, there's no arguing that the installation of particularly the second statue, but you could argue the first as well, but the second one that just got removed, that got elevated 115 feet in the air, that is the story of white supremacy and of active intimidation and oppression of African Americans in the late 19th century. And for us to not acknowledge that and not tell that story is would be a huge problem.
And you know, you talked earlier about the 21st century of Charleston. What should that conversation be like right now?
I mean, you know, I hate to keep using these buzzwords that are being thrown around, but I do think inclusivity is super important. I mean, we all know that in the early 20th century, pre-civil rights era, certainly, and you can even argue into the late 20th century and even 21st century, that marginalized communities have not had a seat at the table when we're talking about monuments or public policy or, you know, anything related to sort of our city. So I do think we have to make sure that the right people are engaged on whatever topic it is, whether it's the topic of monuments or the topic of criminal justice reform or education. We just have to make sure that there is that people's voices are going to be heard, that we're providing a forum, a venue to convene the true diversity of our community, which includes African Americans, it includes Latinx communities, it includes the LGBTQ community. I mean, there's lots of marginalized communities that have really not been engaged and involved in decisions as to how our city is run. And so to me, that's 21st century dialogue. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to, you know, make a space at the table for these other communities.
And you also said earlier at the top of your op-ed, you said this quote, how inspirational that is, it would be to use the call on the Calhoun Monument to create a new monument that honors this period in our growth as a more inclusive community. Where is the growth right now, Winslow?
Where is the what? The growth?
Yes, sir. Where's the growth?
Well, I mean, I think the what's going on in our community as it relates to the protests and the concerns over you know, policing and police brutality and you know, all these other issues very important for the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's giving them a space to discuss issues that are important to them, but it's also, it can't be a one-dimensional. This has to be a sort of 360-degree conversation that engages, you know, whether you want to call it the white community, but the African American community. I mean, we need to acknowledge that that's where we're headed, and make sure that momentum continues, and that, again, we provide spaces for all of us to engage in whatever issue that is of interest at that time. But, you know, my hope is that this isn't just on the radar. You know, we have, of course, no one condones the violence and or looting and you know, vandalism that occurred over the Memorial Day, or I guess before, whenever that was, right after Memorial Day weekend. But you know, I think we need to acknowledge there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment, and we have to do better as a community to provide a space for those people to express themselves and hopefully move, not only just express themselves, but that there is a concerted effort to, you know, engage and ultimately pass and act policy that helps create a more equitable Charleston.
Winslow Hastie, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups, and we'll continue this conversation in a traditional manner.
I look forward to that, Quintin. Thank you very much.
Well,
Take care of yourself. All right.